me to do is to introduce Trisha Shetty, who is our speaker this morning, and hand over to her. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm just going to adjust this mic. Mic check. Am I audible? Perfect. At the offset, thank you so much for having me. I am going to speak a little slowly. I tend to speak fast, so if at any point you need me to speak slowly, just give me a cue so I can slow down for the translation. I'm going to quickly just set the context with introducing myself. I'm sure you're wondering, why is there a person who's not wearing a scarf, who's not a scout amongst us here speaking? So in the beginning, thank you for having me, for hosting me, and being gracious enough to accept me and have me deliver a keynote here. My work and what I do. I am a lawyer by profession. I am based out of India, India's home, Mumbai. About 3 odd years ago, I quit the earlier job that I had, and I had no experience in the social service sector, had never worked. My parents are not from the line. No one had any idea, and I said, I want to get into the women's rights space. I knew that that's an issue that I really cared about. And the one thing I kept telling myself is, I want to make sure we are need-driven and not cause-driven. And by that, what I mean is, a lot of people were talking about gender equality, gender-based discrimination and violence, especially after the grotesque rape that happened in India in 2012. I don't know if you all have heard of it, the brutal gang rape case in a bus that happened. To those who don't know, it was an unfortunate tragedy where a young girl was on a bus with her friend, and they were gang raped. They, being the girl, was gang raped. It was the most brutal kind of abuse, and her body was thrown. She eventually succumbed to injuries and died. And we call it the Nirbhaya case, which means the fearless. We don't take the girl's name, we call her the fearless girl. And that led to the biggest street protests in the history of the world on an issue of sexual violence. People took to the streets, demanded for justice, demanded for change in systems, and a lot of conversations started happening around gender equality, gender-based discrimination, and violence. So for me, it was important that when we as an organization come and start and do work in this space, we're not just doing it because the cause is important, but also, what are the solutions I'm providing? Is my solution needed by the community or not? Or am I just doing it as a feel-good factor? So I spent, oh, sorry. So got it. Oh, this is slow, but I will go slow. I'm used to doing TV debates where you have 1 minute to put your point of view across, so I will go slower, sorry. Okay. So I spent a lot of time, I was a 24, 23-year-old woman visiting police stations, visiting hospitals, visiting courtrooms, and just asking questions. I was like, I know the law says this, what is actually happening on ground, and just trying to figure out what are the solutions that as an organization we can put forth. And the main thing that I realized is, you know, when was the last time any of you all called up a friend and said, have you eaten at a restaurant? We go online and do it, right? There is websites, they'll show you the reviews, menus, all of that. But there was no information available online on what are the laws against sexual abuse and violence and how do you report it. So for me as an organization, it was important for us to have that website. And that's how we started. We started an organization called She Says. It is a completely youth-led, youth-driven organization. I have a team of over 20 plus people, and they're all young. And we work on multiple issues. We don't have a 5-year plan, 10-year plan. And I'll tell you why in a little bit, but mainly because the problems are so nuanced. There are so many problems that I can't just have one solution. So what we do is we throw 10 solutions, see what sticks, keep getting impact assessment, and on basis of that, we keep editing and re-editing. And most of our work is based on the premise of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I know Kif said some of you have some questions about that, so I'll do my best to address those. What are the Sustainable Development Goals? In 2015, countries around the world, 197 member states, countries, came together and adopted unanimously the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals ranging from end poverty, address climate change, sustainable cities, end hunger, gender equality, sustainable fashion. So 17 goals that ranged from a variety of topics to address the global problems that we have today. And countries unanimously adopted these goals with a simple premise that we are supposed to reach these goals by 2030 if we are to survive. And each goal is interconnected. The goals do not work in silos, they are interconnected. And the most beautiful thing for me with the Sustainable Development Goals is the commitment that the country has made. The commitment is leave no one behind, right? That's what countries unanimously said, that they would leave no one behind. Now, what does it mean to leave no one behind? If we're honest, and if we look around and have honest dialogue and conversation, we cannot disagree on the fact that every minute we're losing young lives and we're leaving people behind. I told you I come from India. Just 2 months ago, there was a case that again rocked the nation. We all came down to the streets. What was the case? It was a case of gender-based violence. But before I even talk about that, I want to first say, you know, the tagline for my speech is education for gender equality, right? Everyone is always keen, and this is something I've noticed, everyone is always keen to talk about gender equality. Yeah, I'm for gender equality, I'm for gender equality, I believe women and men should be equal. But every time you talk about the inequality, every time you talk about the discrimination women face, that's when people get uncomfortable. They don't want to hear what you have to say anymore. I was in Qatar a while back, and I was giving a speech on, again, gender equality, and I get a call just before I give my speech that said, listen, we know you talk a lot about sexual violence, but it'll make our audience very uncomfortable. So say sexual assault, but don't say rape. Say a woman was sexually assaulted, but don't get into the details. And that's where I had to object, because my basic philosophy and principle is, if listening to stories of sexual violence and abuse makes you uncomfortable, then imagine how bad it is for the person who's actually going through it. I can deal with you being uncomfortable, but our silence is not okay. So if one thing I'll ask upon all of you is, I know the stuff that I say makes people uncomfortable, they don't want to hear it, they'd rather just not talk about it, but we have to talk about it. So I will implore upon you to not be uncomfortable, to fight that impulsive reaction that you have, and really use the space to have honest conversation and dialogue. And if at any point you don't agree with me, you have an opposing point of view, you have an intervention, please just raise your hand, interrupt me, because I want this to be a free-flowing dialogue and conversation. Interrupt me and we will talk. Because what is the purpose of education if not to raise awareness, right? If not to have conversation and dialogue on real issues. So speaking again about the SDGs and the commitment to leave no one behind. 2 months ago, there was a case that came up in my country of an 8-year-old child who had been kidnapped for 8 days, and 8 days later, her body was found in a temple. This was a Muslim girl, a child, 8-year-old child, Muslim girl, who was kidnapped, taken to a temple, and raped over 8 days. Gang raped over 8 days. The rapists were calling their other friends. One of the rapists called up his other friend and said, come satisfy your hunger. His other friend came from another city to come and rape her. There were policemen involved who, before they killed the girl, they kept sedating the girl. They kept drugging her and sedating her so that they could continue to rape her over 8 days. And before they killed her, the policeman involved said, let me rape her one more time before I'll kill her. And they eventually killed her. They took a stone and they beat her head and they killed her. This is not even the most unfortunate part. The most unfortunate part is that we had educated what we would call civilized people of society, taking to the streets and defending the rapists with our Indian flag. They took out a pro-rapist defense rally, because how can you arrest Hindu men for raping a Muslim girl? This is a conspiracy. And the reason why I'm talking about this is, again, India is a signatory to the Sustainable Development Goals, like all of the countries that you all represent are. But it's not okay to just say, I'm for gender equality, if you cannot also address the inequality and the discrimination, and if you cannot address the fact that we are losing too many lives. You cannot just say, I will leave no one behind, without first acknowledging that we are leaving people behind. And then what are we going to do about the lives that we are leaving behind? And again, I'm getting into grotesque details, and you may feel like, oh, this happens in India, it's a third world country. This doesn't happen here. This is not a problem that affects us. Let me just ask you a simple question. I was speaking to Edward yesterday, and he said, a lot of people don't even realize the privilege we have. We treat our privilege as normal. till we're given a contrasting picture. So I'm going to try and give a contrasting picture and see how this goes. To the women in this audience, or the gender non-conforming people, mainly the women, raise your hands if you change your clothes based on where you're going. Today I'm going, change your clothes based on where you're going. So today, if I'm taking public transport, you'll probably cover up more. Or if you're going out with your friends, you'll feel more comfortable wearing the dress. You wear a scarf sometimes if you're going to certain places. Just a simple raise your hands if you change your clothes based on where you're going. Because of safety, or you want to feel a little safer. To the men in the audience, do you change your clothes based on where you're going? Today I'm taking a train. No, not for professional reasons. But today I'm taking a train, I can't wear those shorts that I wanted to wear, lest a girl come and touch my ass or put her hands up my shirt. This is what I mean. We don't have to talk about the brutal cases of rape that's happening in a third world country and feel like, oh, this is not a problem that we need to worry about. We are from the EU, we're so advanced and we are so developed. Every space that I go to, gender inequality is a pervasive problem. As women, the way we are dealing with inequality is by constantly censoring ourselves. Every time we step out, we have to think of who's going to touch us, who's going to stare at us, who's going to molest us, who's going to make that remark against us. And we feel like maybe changing our clothes, having some sort of control is going to make us safer. It isn't. But my point is, everything that we do, our lifestyle is governed by the fact that we're not safe and we don't feel safe. And this is not because all women here have some mental issue where we believe that, the world is against us. No, because we are living in a pervasively unequal society. And I don't want to hear about, oh, at least it's not as bad as it's in India. At least women are not getting raped in buses. No, if you're setting the bar that low, then that is another problem. I would rather we talk about how can we be equal, have equal access, be safe. And coming back to the EU, because I feel like it's important to put forth numbers. According to the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, 1 out of 3 women under the age of 15 in the European Union have experienced sexual abuse. The overall score that EU has when it comes to gender equality is 66.2 out of 100, which may seem good. But let me tell you that the points have gone up by only 4 in the last 10 years. So those are the facts. Those are the reality that we're trying to put forth. And I spoke about sustainable development goals. When I said the issues are interconnected, the issues are linked, what did I mean by that, right? The 17 goals. Very often people will tell you, find the one goal that, you are most passionate about. It could be gender equality, it could be education, it could be climate change. But I'm here to tell you that there is no one goal that you have to be more passionate about. All the issues are interconnected. Let me give you an example. In India, only 12% of women use sanitary napkins, menstrual hygiene products, tampons, out of 455 million women who menstruate. Now, what do the rest of them use? Any thoughts? If you're not using sanitary napkins or menstrual hygiene products when you menstruate, what do you think the rest of the women are using? Cloth, ash, plastic, dried leaves, sand. Those are the unsafe alternatives being used instead of sanitary napkins. Who in the audience here would rather use cloth and ash as opposed to menstrual hygiene products? Which woman or a transgender man who's biologically a woman, which biological woman has a choice on using sanitary napkins or menstrual hygiene products? But that's what our women are forced to use. Now, how does that link to other issues? Because of this is the second leading cause for young girls to drop out of school in India. We have a 23% school dropout rate after forced labor. Menstrual hygiene is the second leading cause. So that's your link to education. We have an 80% increase in reproductive tract infection. That's your link to health. India is the second leading cause for cervical cancer deaths across the world, with doctors making a clear link to poor menstrual hygiene and cervical cancer. Then, of course, your economic loss. The fact that people are dropping out of school, they don't end up pursuing further education, and that's another loss to the economy. Your economic participation and overall loss to the GDP, because we know this, that when you educate young girls, a country's GDP goes up. This is not made up, this is proved statistics. So this goes to show you the links. Now again, this is not a problem solely in India. I know that there's a UK delegation here. Just raise of hands at the UK delegation. Do you know that period poverty is a huge problem that the UK is facing? Numbers again. 1 out of 10 women in the UK do not have access to menstrual hygiene products. 137,700 children miss school in the UK every year. 40% of women in the UK use toilet paper instead of sanitary napkins. So again, this is not a problem that poor old India is suffering. This is a global problem. And the only common denominator again ends up being women. Because across the world, you look at women, they will suffer the most when it comes to any and every situation and scenario. And this is not me again, putting my feminist propaganda, though of course I am a feminist and I will sell my feminist propaganda anywhere and everywhere. But my propaganda is to present to you all with the facts and reality and say, we can't talk about equality without you first addressing that we are not treated equally, that we don't have the same access, that we have barriers and discrimination that men don't have. And that's not poor women or hating on men, that's the reality. We can't take a step forward without first acknowledging our privilege and our reality. If you have access to menstrual hygiene products, you are privileged. And know that you represent a small number. You are not the majority. I am not the majority. The majority of people are suffering. And then, of course, comes education as the great equalizer, right? Why am I talking about these issues? Do you know what the single most effective solution to address climate change is? Two most effective solutions to address climate change. That's an issue that a lot of the countries are talking about. France is leading that. President Macron has made it the big agenda. What are the 2 most effective solutions to address climate change? Anyone? Cost-effective solution, no. It's actually investing in young girls' education and family planning. But these topics don't sound sexy, right? What sounds nice and attractive is reduction in fossil fuels. But if I tell you, it's actually investing in young girls' education and family planning. And again, I'm not making this up. Look it up online. You have phones, look it up. Those are the single most effective solutions. And again, it comes back to the SDGs, how all the issues are interconnected. And I come back to education. Education being the greatest equalizer. That's what we say. You have access to education, it's the greatest equalizer. But how will that be so if we don't first address access and barriers? And this goes to everything, not just education. When it comes to education, what are the barriers? There are barriers of sanitation. A lot of countries, especially in the developing countries, women don't go to school because they don't have good toilet facilities. It comes back to toilets, as simple and basic as that. Infrastructure of the school. Safety, violence. A fact that a lot of women are dropping out of higher education because STEM is not a vocation that's thought of as a women-oriented vocation. So we don't have women studying in tertiary education or more than that. So when you're talking about education, you have to first address access and barriers. And by access, and again, this is not just specific to education. I'm talking about this in terms of any institution. Be it the Scouts, be it back home for me in India, my organization, be it any institution that you're a part of. Access and barriers. And when I say access, I don't just mean saying, oh yeah, we've opened our door to women, but they have to survive in a man's world. No. How are you making sure that the space you are providing is equally responsive to all genders, to their needs, to their wants, and making sure that you're not asking them to fit in a man's world? Because we've done that. For too long, we've tried to fit in a man's world, and guess what? The world is not getting any better. So right now, we need to figure out how can we be more inclusive, and address the needs of every single gender. Then comes quality education. And I think this is where the Scouts also play a huge role. Let's be honest, the education that we are being provided, unless you're part of a very small niche elite schooling that provided you with quality education, we are not being provided with quality education. How many of you all were taught sex ed in school? Sex education? That is quality education. Unfortunately, in my country, they've banned sex education. In a lot of countries, in the US, that's a big push, ban sex education, because of some absurd ideology that if you tell people about safe sex, they'll have more sex. Even though it's been proven that the less you talk about it, the more the instances of unplanned pregnancy. And again, economic burden, because young women don't have the resources to be, more often than not, don't have the resources to be able to do family planning at their young age. So I go back to quality education. The fact that we need to talk about how women can have better agency over their body, how they can have better control over their body to make their own decisions. Sex education. How that we, in our schools, how many of you are taught about handling finances? How to plan for money, how to budget. Finances? That's amazing. A lot of us, again, were not taught about it. Families don't talk to you about how to handle money, how to budget, how to invest your resources. And these are important things that we need to learn about. The impetus on innovation and entrepreneurship, these need to be included in our education model. The fact that a technological boom, a revolution, an industrial revolution is gone. The fact that we need to invest on vocational studies, on the internet model and the advances that that could have towards opportunity and jobs. We need to look at our education model and figure out how can we include quality education over just saying, I've got a degree and that degree doesn't really mean for anything. And then comes your workplace bias. Now as women, we fought and fought and fought. We have fought to survive. We have fought for quality education. We have fought against people who are trying to touch us, molest us, ta-ta-ta. After all of the situations that are against us, we managed to get a job. And then comes workplace bias. Again, coming back to the EU. Women earn grossly 16.2% lesser than men do. And actually, it's great that we are here in Romania, because I must give you all credit. You all have the lowest percentage of wage gap. In Romania, the number is 5.27. France, the number of CEOs who are women is less than 6%. And then comes unpaid domestic work. The fact that women have to take on a lot more household work and that there's no value put to it, which leads to further loss of economy for us as women. And the reason why I'm saying all of this is, again, it's important when we talk about education, we talk about after education, then what? We're all hoping to get access to quality education, learn life skills, and get jobs, and get good opportunities, and do better, do that much better. But if we don't talk about the fact that at every system, at every level, the system is rigged against women. We are being discriminated against, we have unequal access, we won't get there. We just won't address that, and we will keep leaving people behind. We will keep leaving 50% of the population behind. So, my job is really grim. The reason why I talk about a lot of these things, because this is my reality. My day-to-day reality is meeting child rapists or meeting children as old as 5 who've been raped, and I have to go to the hospital with them, and the hospital staff won't even touch the child. There was a case where a 5-year-old child who barely came up to my knee was raped, and I had to fight with the hospital just to get her pelvic exam done because they were worried that her pelvis was fractured because of the impact of the rape. I had to fight for all of those things. So I see the worst side of humanity on a day-to-day basis. And it's hard to not lose hope. But you cannot lose hope, because the 3 things that I keep going back to, which I see a lot of similarity in the Scout model, and I'm so glad to be here, is value-based leadership, is a commitment to leave no one behind, and is finding a community. The third one is finding a community of people who share the same values with you and share the same commitment to actively, and I'll emphasize the word actively, to actively work towards a better world. You just feeling that we need to invest more in girls' education, that we need to do more for gender equality, feelings don't do much. Feelings are a good place to start, but we need active involvement. And this is where I come back to the Scouts model. I was looking around and talking to people, and I'm so amazed that so many of you, I normally speak to rooms of young people. I feel like it's harder to have the older generation show up. But I see intergenerational involvement here. And that's beautiful. I see people across all age groups showing up. And every time I ask someone, why are you all showing up? What is the one catch? What is the one pull? A lot of you are like volunteering your time and your resources to be here. And the most common answer I got is because we share the same values. This is the community for us. We show up for each other because I know that tomorrow if I need something, a fellow scout will show up for me. And please do let me know if there's some other magic sauce that I'm missing, because I would love to take these values and principles and talk about it in other communities. And the reason I'm saying this is because here lies the power. You all have the power to make real difference, real tangible difference. And that comes with first having honest conversation and dialogue. And there's this common misnomer that if you love an institution, if you love your country, you won't talk bad about it, or you won't challenge it. The amount of times I've been called an anti-national, or a Muslim lover, or a Muslim child's lover. So by religion, I am a Hindu. But every time I'll advocate for Muslim rights, or say it's not okay to penalize one religion, they'll instantly be like, oh, that means you don't like your own religion. That means you're a Muslim lover. Not that being a Muslim lover is in any way an insult, but that's how they'll throw it at you. The minute you speak about India and the problems, they'll say, oh, you're an anti-national. You're not a patriot. And I disagree. No one is going to tell me that I'm not a patriot and that I don't love my country and that I don't love the institutions that I'm working in by simply demanding for better. Y'all love your Scout movement. The best thing y'all can do for the Scout movement, for Scouts as an organization, for your country. I know one of the values is country first, right? For the Scouts now, for your country. What is it? There are 3 things now. Religion, people. Okay, sorry. Forgive me. So the best thing you can do in terms of duty to yourself and for the other is to demand for better. So I am of the logic, and I'm of the belief, not the logic, that the best thing that anyone can do for the institution that they're working in, then be it a religious institution, or be it an organization like the Scouts or the UN or anything, is to challenge it. Is to have honest, real dialogue and conversation and say, I love this organization, I love this movement, I'm a part of it, but it needs to do better. And how can it do better? How can we make sure that there's equal access? How can we make sure that we are setting the footprint and the example for other organizations to follow? Because there's tremendous power here. 40 million people active? That's powerful. That's the largest organization. There's tremendous power here. So that's the thought that I would leave you with. Of how can the Scouts have better access to all genders? How can they remove barriers? And the reason why I would leave you with the thoughts is because it's not okay for me as an outsider to come and say, oh, I think this is what you need to do, this is what you need to do, because I don't know better. I don't know the Scout model as well as you all do. I don't know the kind of privileges that are already there. I don't know the kind of systems that are already set up. You know that. Which is why the solutions need to come from you, which is why the honest dialogue and conversation needs to be led by you. So how can the Scout model have better access? What are the barriers that you all can remove? And you're looking at the largest education movement that the Scouts is going to lead. So how can you lead quality education? How can you address issues that are real world issues, that need real world solutions, that need ideas generated by the youth? And those are the thoughts that I would leave you with. How can we do better as a community, as a people? And again, this is where I would need you all to take lead and have those conversations with me I asked Radu if I could keep my talk short so that we can have questions and dialogue and conversations, because if we are to have the Scouts lead on gender equality, one, I would love to know, what does that mean for you all? I mean, forget about the SDGs and the 17 goals and the goals have targets under each goals. A lot of people at the UN will tell you, remember all the 17 goals. You don't need to remember. A lot of people at the UN also don't know what the 17 goals are. So knowing the names doesn't matter. If by virtue of the work that you are doing, you are following the principle of the Sustainable Development Goals, that's more than enough. I don't know what the 17 goals are either, and I'm an SDG advocate. So my point is, I would want to open the conversation and the space for all of you to tell me, one, just your general thoughts and feedback on everything that I covered, because I did cover a lot. Two, how do you feel we can all do better? Or even, what are the best case practices that you all are doing that you believe could be learnings for other institutions and organizations? Because you all have been doing something tremendously right to have run a sustained organization with a sustained force of participation for so many years. And there is beauty and magic in that. If you can tell me what are the best practices of building a community, I can take those learnings to other groups and share that with them. So what are the best learnings? And also having very honest real dialogue. What are the access barriers that you all still face? Especially the women, the marginalized communities, the gender non-conforming individuals. And then I'm hoping we can take it forward from there and really have tangible change and impact. Because more than anything, whatever happens here is a very sanitized environment. The real world is waiting for you the second we step out of this door. So I'm trying to figure out how can the conversation that we have here for the next 30 odd minutes, what kind of change and impact can it have? Can it have for me learnings that I can take back home? And just in terms of this space, you'll have an audience here. If there's any stories that you all would like to share that, you know what, this has been a problem that I've faced, and how can we address this? Doesn't have to be specific to the Scout movement, but putting forth a problem and saying, this is a problem. What is a solution that my community would be able to provide for me? Because the only hope we have is if we talk about issues. The gang rape case that I told you about, the mother is still alive. She's a brave woman called Asha Devi. And I met her recently and I asked her, how have you not lost hope? Because for me, it's very hard to not lose hope. I was even speaking to Edward and I'm like, I feel like, I take 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, but we still keep taking those 2 steps forward because what is the option? And she told me, this is the woman who lost her daughter to the brutal gang rape that the world knew about. She said, silence is not an option for me because I know the cost that you pay for silence. My daughter paid the cost for silence. For the country's silence, my daughter paid the cost. So every minute that I keep quiet, someone else is losing a life. And by not looking at the problem, by not acknowledging the problem isn't going away. And I know the cost one has to pay for not acknowledging the problem. So I will be damned if I'm silent. I will be damned if I'm silenced. I have a platform, I will speak. So you all have a platform. I would implore upon you to speak, to share your truth, to share your stories. Because again, I'm coming as an outside force and entity. A lot of what I'm saying, you may not connect with. But if someone within your own table gets up and says, this is my truth, this is what's happened to me, this is what I need for the community to do better for me, there's a lot of scope and impact in that. So that's it. I'll stop here. And I would implore upon you all to just raise your hands and start sharing some thoughts based on what we've said. If you have questions, I would love to take your questions as well. And hopefully we can make sure that this 1 hour of talk and exchanged dialogue leads to inspiration to do more and leads to conversations having real tangible change and impact. So that's it. I would love if I could have some questions from you all, or just raise your hands and share some thoughts, or what is your idea of a gender equal world and how do you think we can get there, or what are the kind of barriers that you all have faced?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. Thank you so much, Trisha. Your words have been amazing. They went straight to my heart. I wanted to say that I wish Romania could set an example regarding the wage gap, but we also have to analyze the context. It's not so hard to not have a big wage gap when you're making roughly 200 euros per month. So the context is also important. I would like Romania to set an example, but we still have the double day shift. Many women in Romania are going to work and then coming back home and working once again because of course they have to keep the house clean, of course they have to cook. I wish we could set an example, but you see, we are denied sex ed, and I know that denied is a powerful word, but it's true. When you think of the fact that we have one of the largest number of underage births. So yes, thank you for your words. I wish that sometime in the future we can set an example, and I hope we can work to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your honest truth. It's interesting that you say, you know, of course, women are expected to work in the kitchen and in the household thing. And this is the kind of contrast that I would want to put across. No. What is, of course, we would have to work. How can we together as a society come to a place where we say, no, you share equal household responsibility? If I'm marrying into a family, if I have a husband or a life partner, just by my biology of roaming around with a vagina, I'm not more indisposed to do household work. There is nothing in my biology that makes me more indisposed to do household work that a man cannot do. So how can we have those conversations and dialogue? Because I don't want to say, of course, you know, we are expected to work in the kitchen. I believe that we as women have more to give to society than going to the bedroom, providing a man sex, and then going to the kitchen and cleaning up and providing him food on the table. And statistics and data shows that to us. So how can we, when we're in this setting, how can the Scout movement, she's put forth very honest opinions and viewpoints. And thank you for, you know, even putting a juxtaposition where she said it's easy to have equal wage when income in itself is a huge problem. And the second thing that you said is denied sex education. And denied is not a strong word, it's an accurate word. Very often we look at oppressors and call them, you know, oh, they're crazy. You know, they're psychotic. The people oppressing, they don't know better. No, the people oppressing us haven't oppressed us for so long by being crazy and psychotic. It's strategy, it's strategic. They mean to oppress, they mean to deny. So how can we as an organization, how can the Scout movement really address that is a question that, you know, I would throw out. Awana, do you feel like there's anything that the Scout movement and the community that people have built here, when they say impetus on quality education, even if it's a small impact, how do you believe that, you know, we as a community could address those problems? Because I go back to hope. We have to hope for better, otherwise we're doomed.
Well, it's an endgame question. I've been thinking about it for quite a long time. But I think we are doing some steps, at least in the Scouting community, through our new focus on diversity and inclusion. This is very important because it also addresses topics of discrimination. And yeah, it's important because people don't know sometimes that discrimination exists. Okay, you haven't faced a case of discrimination in your life. Maybe you are very, I don't know, fortunate. But it's important to know that it exists. And this is how you can get educated and afterwards take some steps to address it.
Any other interventions?
Anyone else? Hands up. You're keeping me fit again, David.
Thank you for a challenging and inspiring speech, and I hope we can all take to heart some of those challenges and to reflect on them. As the regional director, I see sometimes statistics, etc., which reflect very poorly on our representationality, how we represent ourselves. And I think, for example, in relation to gender, in those organizations which have mixed membership, totally mixed membership, there is a majority of female members, and yet the governance of those organizations is quite often only in the hands of men. And I think that we need to be able to reflect that, are we allowing, are we permitting, are we facilitating, are we ensuring that we are properly representative of our members? I'm an old guy with white hair, and I think that I'm happy that we have intergenerational dialogue and representation. I think that's one of our strengths. But sometimes that length of office means that you see things and they don't change. And that's really disappointing. And I, as your regional director, feel sometimes disappointed that we don't properly represent what is on the ground and our members. And I think we need to keep looking at that. And that's about not saying we're open to all. That's not enough. Our umbrella needs to get bigger so that we're encompassing more young people and enabling more young people to be the change makers that we want them to be. So a bit of a statement, and maybe a bit of a disappointment, but to recognize that we do have that capacity. We can change, and we should change, and we must change.
I think, honestly, thank you for that. This is just going off that example, I'll tell you one thing. So when we think of cooks, right? Most household cooks, you think of a woman, right? Women are more often than not in the kitchen cooking. But when you think of chefs, it's men. So cooks, even though we're more often than not cooking, the second it becomes a position of powership, leadership, it's suddenly chefs are men. And maybe those statistics we can't do much about. But when you talk about institutions like the Scout, it takes bravery to get up and make the statement that you made, where you had an honest moment of reflection. And I think from there, from the fact that you said, I am disappointed and we need to do better, that's going to be transformational change for all of these people who are within the Scout movement, because it comes with that, will comes with that. So thank you so much, because very often we're fighting for people to even say there's something wrong, and then of course comes the you need to do better. But for you to even acknowledge that, I think that's incredibly powerful. So thank you so much. Sorry.
Hello, I'm Jerome. I just have a small thought about the governance of our movement, because of course to be volunteer in scouting is on your free time, so you have a work, and then after that you take some time to do something. And of course if you have a double shift, it's even difficult to do that. So that's the reason why I believe that as a Scout movement, of course we need to promote some balanced homework in our society. I see in my association that, let's say 5 years ago, women were underrepresented in the governance organization. And of course, it's not a question about rape and so heavy situation, but the simple fact to provide systematic babysitting, the ability to make an invoice for the movement if you just have to take some babysittings in order to make your voluntary mission, was a real big impact factor to allow women to take responsibilities in the association, because men do that spontaneously and women were a little bit afraid to do that. So we proposed these small changes, and it had a quite big impact. It started very slowly, but when it was in the culture, after 2 or 3 years, it appeared to be quite efficient. So I think that for this kind of event, we should think about that.
And also, I'm just going by what you're saying and linking it back to Oana's point. There are a lot of men here. You're a part of families as well. You know, if you have shown up here, that means we can also have conversation within the Scout movement to say, how can the men within the Scout movement share equal domestic work at home to make sure that their partners can also be here and be equal participants, right? I think change can even come within the movement. where the men have honest conversation and dialogue, and even a moment of reflection where they say, are we doing equal amount of household work? To make sure, even if it's not for my partner to join the scout movement, to do something else that she may feel very passionate about. If an organization that's 40 million strong, out of that, if the men take leadership and say, we will set the benchmark to lead change within the community, that's the kind of impact and change that, you know, honestly, even going and lobbying with my government or going outside, I'm never going to have. So I'm just going back to what you said and saying that I see so much empowerment and energy in the room. How do we capitalize on that and really push for more? Any other?
First of all, thank you for your words today. I actually have a challenge for the room. In about 11 months' time, our region will be in the process of selecting a new team to be running or leading the region. We have a conference coming up a little bit more than a year's time, and in about, we calculated 11 months, by then we will know who the candidates for the next committee are going to be. And so the challenge is quite clear. Please start thinking about who you think is going to be leading the next committee, obviously in the spirit of what we're saying. Are we going to have 6 males? Are we going to have 6 females? Are we going to have a mixed team like we have at the moment? So it's just something to put in the back of your minds, because the reality is that the people in this room play a role in the future of scouting in Europe, because the people you choose to be leading the organization in the next few months will then have an effect on what direction scouting will be taking within Europe. Thank you.
I just wanted to give you more exercise now. Hi, my name is Ernst. I'm from Austria. Thank you very much for your speech, and perhaps to take it out again of our internal discussion of who will lead Scouting Europe in the next years, to come back to your issues. And I admire your stance, and I think that you are in a very friendly environment now, and I can expect that most of the environments you speak to are not so friendly, or society that needs you. Could you give us, I mean, we know that conviction happens in our dimension, but change can only happen if we talk to the young people and change their positions to those things. Would you be able to give us some examples of how you link up to youth organizations, must not be scouting, in order to give us ways of how we could implement those thoughts better? Scouting in India has 4 million members, and I'm sure that they are not all not affected by what happens there. So perhaps if you could give us some examples of how you personally have good experiences with youth movements.
Right.
That would be great.
Thank you. So I think a few points there. One is young people can advocate for issues a lot better than the older generation. Right? It's just a fact. If you look at the gun violence issue that's going on, the older generation has tried for years. It took the Never Again movement led by young people to really take the dialogue at the forefront and say, we're going to have real change. Their tagline is the young people will win. Coming back home, so marital rape is not a crime in my country. The definition of rape has an exception that says no man can be charged with sexually assaulting his wife unless the wife is less than 15 years of age. So basically, if ex-girl gets raped by a stranger, she can file a rape case. But if the rapist is her own husband, she can't file a rape case. It is not even grounds for divorce. And that's a huge debate that's happening in our country. Unfortunately, we have a women and child development minister saying, in India, you can't criminalize marital rape because Indian women don't know the concept of consent. It's a Western concept that Indian women don't know about. And every time I talk about this issue, the kind of vitriol and trolling that I have received, everything from, who's even going to touch you, to you feminists will take down the Indian fabric, to you should be, that curly-haired whore should be gang raped and thrown out of India. I bet she likes to get fucked by her dog. And again, these are the things that get told to me online, and these are one of the nicer things that get told to me online. But the interesting part is, we take sessions in schools and colleges. We reach out to educational institutes and we tell them, even though the government has banned sex education, we've developed a curriculum and we would ask you to teach that in your schools and colleges. The curriculum is taken by young people. Because I've noticed that more often than not, if you have an older person going and talking to a room of younger people, the connection isn't there. So all our change, all our initiatives are led by young people as well, on ground. So one of the sessions that we took in a school, and we spoke about marital rape very briefly, just took a 2-minute break just to tell them this is the issue, this is the problem, and this is why we need to advocate for the issue, and we need more voices to advocate for the same. Now, one of the students in the class, a young boy, put out a slam poetry. A boy put out a slam poetry talking about the issue of marital rape, and the amount of positive response that video got, it got millions and millions of views. And I was worried. I was like, oh, most people are going to troll him and threaten him and abuse him. No. Most people really resonated with what he said. So for me, my learning was that it doesn't matter who carries the message. Different people carrying the message forward, using their own tone, using their own voice, has a lot of influence and power and change. And again, I go back to social media, because most countries around the world, the leadership, the governments are following social media. Policies are being led by social media. Conversations are being led by social media. So going back to that, when I spoke about the issue of lack of access to sanitary napkins, we led a campaign. We filed representations to multiple government authorities, legal representations, and no one took action. And power of engaging with the youth. We reached out to 15 to 20 young people, not specifically young per se, but people looked at as youth influencers. So even if they were not young, they were called youth influencers across diaspora. So we brought comedians on board. Very often we've noticed that if we use the power of social media and bring in comedians on board, even a message as heavy as sexual abuse and violence and menstruation, they have the power of packaging it well, such that it's consumable by people at large. So we led a campaign on social media. We brought multiple influencers on board. We simply gave them statistics and said, these are the statistics. On this date, we'll ask you to go on social media from this time to this time. We gave slabs of time to every people and said, upload a video, tag our finance minister with the hashtag Lahu Ka Lagan. Lahu Ka Lagan means blood tax. And upload a video in your own way. These are the statistics. Tag the finance minister and ask him to drop the tax. We didn't end up spending a single rupee. In less than 24 hours, on Twitter alone, we got 24 million impressions. It is the largest campaign globally on the issue of tax-free menstrual hygiene products. We had comedians who put up videos to our finance minister saying, do you think I've taken a monthly subscription to bleed? Why are you taxing me monthly? So it wasn't even like, you know, gory and sad. It was varying degrees of conversation. But that led to bipartisan political support. People across diaspora talking about it. Suddenly an issue of menstruation that's very taboo became mainstream. Artists were using soiled tampons and doing artwork out of it. And that just led to the most incredible conversation. Sorry. And that just led to the most incredible conversational change. So for me, what I believe is there's a misnomer that young people are lazy and that we don't fight for our rights. I'll go back to statistics. Globally, and this is Ahmad Al-Hendawi, the Secretary General, when he was at the UN, one of the initiatives that he ran was not too young to run for public office. And the statistics, globally, parliamentarians in their 20s are less than 1.65%, around 1.65. The median age of parliamentarians globally is 53. Now you expect young people to show up and vote for you. You call us, you know, millennials lazy, y'all don't show up, y'all don't participate. But none of the older generation will show up for us to hold positions of leadership, to run for office. The minimum age for running for office is not even 18. If at 18 we're old and smart enough to cast a vote for you, then why aren't we old and smart enough to hold positions of leadership? So herein comes, young people are anyways at the forefront. They're fighting for change. You see what happened in the Ukraine revolution. You see what happened in Tahrir Square. You see revolutions around the world. Young people are at the forefront. So for me, as an organization, what we keep looking at is how can we leverage that energy? How can we tap into that? How do we rope them into the conversation and really give them the strength and agency to be able to advocate for the issue the way they want to. My agenda is simple: gender equality. So I'm going to tell you, anywhere and everywhere I go, these are the issues, with the hope that at least 5 people in this room are going to take the message forward in their way. But they will take that message forward, and I know that. And that will lead to a cycle of change. So that's how we engage with young people, and we don't give up hope, because there is no option not to give up hope. There was a question there, I believe.
I would like to go back a bit to our scout background, and I want to share with you some good practice. I was involved in Poland. It's about setting example, and it's my personal experience, because I'm a mother of 3. So when my first daughter was born, I decided that I don't want to quit scouting. I mean, this is not the issue, that I just becoming a wife and a mother means I don't have a chance to be a scout leader anymore. So I started to bring my own child with me everywhere. We can see this in the same. And in only few years, because then I was a chief of department, so someone who is really seen a lot in the field, and only in a few years we can see a lot of young people doing exactly the same, and not only on national level, on the regional level and the district level as well. It's I'm not the only one who did it, but because I did it among young people, there's the thing in their head that this is not the end of scouting, and even people in charge are having babies and not quitting. So this is something I'm proud of, that I was a part of it. It wasn't something I thought about. I'm not really feminist. It was just about my own life, and not being complete without scouting in my life. So this is sometimes really small steps, not very hard thing to do, that can change the situation. Thank you.
Any more from any more? Oh, at the front.
Okay, I'm Nicholas from Belgium. Maybe some will say I'm gonna be the devil advocate. Just speaking about my own experience as a person, not as a scout. Maybe Fabien will never take me back in a international meeting. I would like Fabien to get up, just for an example. Just about a small discussion we had tomorrow in breakfast. Do you think Fabien and me as equal person? Do anybody here think we are equal? I think if he come closer to me, it's of I go closer to him. It's a fact that we are not equal. Okay, I'm taller than him. I'm physical training instructor in the Belgian defense. I practice sport for about 15 hours a week, sorry. And sometimes I do it for a day. I'm practicing triathlon, and I'm able to make a triathlon within 12 hours. He can't do that. But also, he's able to have a journey of work in an office. I'm not able to do it. So we are not equal. And it's the same debate between gender equality. I have this debate once a month with my wife. She gave me 3 magnificent children, and it's a debate we have since now 10 years, and we continue to have that debate. We are not equal, but we have the same rights. And that's the important thing to say. I know it, and she will ever fight against me because I tell her always, we are not equal. Women and men are not equal. They have the same right. And it's always a fight between us. And I think the biggest part to improve that fight is to know we're not equal, but we fight to have the same right between men and women. I'm issued of a family of 7 children. My mother has gave a life to grow us up, and one thing is certain: women's are human men for one thing, and for many others, but for one thing, they are the only who can give life. We are not able to do it. We can have the many power we want as men, we won't ever give life to our children. And that's for me the most magnificent thing in life. It's to give life to a child. And I've got 3 magnificent child, and I'm proud of them, and I'm more proud of my wife who gave them to me. So it's just a small reflection of me to you. Do we have to know we are equal? No, we are not, but we have the same right. Thank you.
I think just, if I may just add a few points to that. Of course, I respect your perspective and I totally get it. We have different biologies, we have different strengths. But the conversation is moving towards gender being fluid. A lot of people are now saying that, you know, gender is fluid. It's an identity that you have. It's a social construct. And when we talk about gender equality, we're going back to the basic premise. We can, of course, get into semantics and say, you know, but men and women are fundamentally, biologically not equal. But to not have access to equal opportunity, to not be treated the same, then be it in any situation and institution, that's where I have a problem. So in India, women were leading the movement for right to pray, where suddenly they stopped in a dargah, in a Haji Ali dargah, in a Muslim mosque. They stopped allowing women the same access to men, saying, no, you can't touch the tomb, because when you touch the tomb, you have to bend down, it exposes your breasts, men are getting sexually active, therefore you don't have access to the same places, therefore you stop there and the men will go further. Now see, this is my problem. Don't tell me that my biology and my breasts makes me unequal, that when a man sees it, firstly it's an insult to men. It's an insult to every good, upstanding man if you tell them that the sight of a woman's boobs makes him sexually aroused and he cannot follow his faith. So this is my problem. It's when people say, and I'm not saying you're saying that, it's when people say your biology therefore does not give you access to equal opportunity. And your biology is the reason for barriers. The fact that you're a woman, you can raise a child. Therefore, you should be better at raising a child than a man. You have the maternal instinct. Therefore, the child must be taken care of by you, because your husband could anyways not do such a good job of it. See, this is my problem. Of course, we're not equal. But my biology does not mean you can discriminate against me. Just because I can give birth to a child does not mean that I have to take care of the child more than the man does. Of course, I can lactate. The milk that is to be provided is to be done by me. But my husband can clean up. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Of course, I can lactate. The milk to be provided can be given by me. But my husband can clean the diapers. There's nothing in my biology that makes me more prone to cleaning a baby's bum better than a man can. Right? So that is my only bone of contention. Where don't use my biology or a woman's biology as a reason to discriminate against me. I'm not saying you're doing that at all. Of course not. But I'm saying that that conversation can I see it on ground where it changes hues. Where they'll say, but we're saying it for your own good, you know. The fact that a lot of women don't have access in defense or in even physical activity, or they're not looked at in leadership positions because, you know, your biology doesn't make you tough and you can't demand for things, you can't ask for questions, and you can't, you know, fight wars for your country. That is where I put the juxtaposing point that you cannot discriminate simply based on biology. We accept differences and then we look at equity. Maybe we can move the conversation away from equality to equity, acknowledging biological differences and how do we get to an equal space. But that's the only 2 points of view that I would put across. Though of course I respect your opinion and I get where you're coming from completely. Bravo.
Hello, I'm Ibis from Belgium, and I want to go back to the uncomfortable place. You know all about safe from harm, but still we will have youngsters, boys and girls, that will be sexually abused inside our organization. So I think everyone who is on a national level has already had a story about that in one of the Scouts groups or guide groups. How do we deal with it? Because a lot of times I have the question how we can blank it out, that nobody knows that it happened in this Scouts group. Do we have to do it like that, or just make it open to the public? That's a question I ask to you.
Does anyone want to answer that? In terms of thoughts? You know, that's also a question, that's a debate that's happening around the UN as well. But there are a few allegations made by against senior officials. And there's a culture of impunity. Coming back to India, child sexual abuse is a huge problem in India. 1 out of every 2nd child has said that they've been sexually abused. That's 50%. Out of which 51.4% are young boys who are being sexually abused. And unfortunately, even though we talk a lot about women's sexual abuse, we don't talk enough about men who are being sexually abused, and there's a lot more trauma and stigmatization. So the only way an organization, and this is why I wasn't specifically referring to sexual abuse, but any movement, if you are to do, sorry, go ahead. Because they don't have avenues of expression. So every time, even if you see, most of the dialogue is governed by women who are being sexually abused, or young children, girls who are being sexually abused. We don't acknowledge the fact that young boys are also being sexually abused. So that is just, instantly there's more stigmatization, and therefore more stigmatization leads to more trauma. Where also, there are cases where some people from the LGBTQI community, say that sometimes they've been sexually abused. And this idiotic ideology they put forth, oh, because you got abused as a boy, now you've become, gay. So this is why I said there's a lot more oppression and stigmatization and trauma. And I go back to the point I made. The best thing you can do for any organization is to not protect the abuser, is to have honest dialogue and conversation and provide all the support you can to the survivor and say, how can the institution do better? How can we resolve it so that it doesn't happen again? Secrecy doesn't do anything. We've seen what has happened with secrecy. It doesn't do anything. So how can any institution, and here again, it does not bring shame to an institution. If anything, it's a model of hope. If an institution comes forth and says, we have a zero tolerance policy, but what does a zero tolerance policy mean? It means, should a case come forward, you handle it effectively. And you don't handle it by being secretive about it, by doing backdoor deals about it, by keeping quiet and transferring that perpetrator from one wing to another. You handle it by taking punitive action, by providing all sorts of resources and rehabilitation for survivors. And I think more than anything here, this is where the Scouts would come forth and propose solutions on how can you all do better, because not acknowledging the problem doesn't make it go away. So I think this is more than anything, thank you for even stating that point of view. I think change comes from uncomfortable conversations. And that's what I'm hoping later some people will come up to you and share ideas on how they can, improve the situation. Sorry.
I'm gonna keep it short because it will be longer because I will be translated. Je voulais juste réagir à notre ami belge. Je ne connais pas ton prénom. Nicolas. C'est pas seulement une question de droit, c'est une question aussi de perception, je pense. On est tous égaux, c'est se dire on peut tout faire de la même manière. Quoi? Or I could translate myself.
No. I would like to come back on what my Belgian colleague was saying earlier on about rights and perception.
On peut avoir le même accès au travail, au même poste, avoir le même salaire dans un monde idéal, mais il y aura toujours des plafonds de verre, des perceptions qui feront qu'il y a une discrimination qui existe. Et on ne peut pas juste, on doit avoir accès aux mêmes droits, mais la perception d'une femme et d'un homme doit être la même, malgré les différences.
We can very well have the same access to work and I would hope to the same salary, but it's really a question of perception and it always comes back to the perceptions not being the same for men and women.
Et je voulais ajouter un autre commentaire sur ce qu'a dit, je crois, David. C'était par rapport à nos institutions. C'est vrai que je pense qu'il y a encore une différence d'accès à certains postes au sein de notre mouvement pour les femmes. Mais je voulais quand même dire qu'en tant que femme, en tant que scout, quand j'étais jeune, en tant que guide, c'est un endroit où je me suis sentie toujours sûre, où j'ai toujours senti que j'avais les mêmes opportunités que les garçons et aujourd'hui que les hommes. Et je pense qu'on peut se féliciter de ça, même si ce n'est pas encore parfait. Je pense qu'on fait quand même des belles choses.
And coming back to the institutional side and access for women, which I feel we have, but I've always felt that even when I was a young guide, I always felt that I was in a safe environment and that I was I had the same opportunities as the boys. And I think that's something that we can really be quite proud of.
I think I'm not sure. Are you from France by any chance? Okay, so President Macron has put a policy where if companies don't pay the same, they'll be charged a fine. I think, I completely agree with you about perception and that there are a lot more nuances. But perception I can't gauge. Perception I can't do much. It's a long-term thing. But right now, what can I do to make sure it's equal access? Therefore, I believe punitive measures do have impact. If as an organization you are forced to declare that you have to pay equal wage to all genders, and that if you don't, you will be punished, it makes a difference. The quota system does work. A lot of people will say, oh no, it doesn't work. But if you look at statistics around the world, the quota system does work. If you ensure that X amount of leadership will have to be women in seniority positions, it works. And going back to a simple example of what, I'm sorry, forgive me, I don't remember your name, but you said that people saw me carrying my child and coming here and that made a difference. If I don't see something, I don't know that I can do the same thing. Therefore, seeing women in leadership positions does work. A lot of people say it takes away merit, that doesn't mean anything. But no, it's been proved, empirical data, that quota system works. So although, we can say perception, but those are vague, abstract terms. How can I implement change right now? Because I don't have the patience, to be very honest, to fight for battles for my children and their children. They can fight their own battles. I want change right now that I can have access to. I want to know that something I'm doing right now will affect me and my colleagues and peers. So what can we as an institution, as an organization, what are the policies we can put in place to ensure we're not just saying equal access, but how are we addressing the barriers and really taking it a step forward and saying, if we don't have equal access, or if in the institutions, if we're not putting women in leadership position, there will be punitive action. That shouldn't scare people. If anything, that should mobilize people to say, we need to do better. So I completely get where you're coming from, but I always try to put a contrasting perspective of policies and change, things that I can measure and see. Because statistics I can see, and I know that that has to change. So that's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Trisha. I'd love to let this conversation go all day, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to interrupt and stop it. So just a great big round of applause. Thank you very much, Trisha. we're going to go now into the coffee break. The coffee will be outside.